Hello there, I'm Rodrigue Delru, community developer on Crusader Kings III, and welcome to our March video update in which we discuss the development of the game. This month we have chatted about tutorials, encyclopedias and tooltips within tooltips, about mercs and war declaration and casus belli, and finally factions and civil wars. Have a look. With Matthew, programmer here at Paradox, we chatted about tutorials and encyclopedia and how to make information be useful on a screen.
We've put a lot of effort into making the interface more approachable for people, just so that the difficulty and complexity comes from playing the game well and having good strategies, instead of finding what number you need to tooltip to find out a piece of information, or Googling what this specific term means. We have embraced fully the tutorial island of CK2. The tutorial we've gone for is a more guided tutorial in two parts. The first part, which is fully guided, has widgets pop up that explain parts of the game, how to move the camera, how to do a marriage, and also highlights relevant interface elements so you can click on them. The other part of the tutorial is a reactive advice, which occurs during normal gameplay. If you find yourself in a situation, what that actually means for you as a player, and some little ideas of what you can do to fix it. That also is enabled in multiplayer, so if you play with your friends, they can have the reactive advice up whilst you just blaze through as an elite gamer. Tooltips. You hover over an icon or a button and it gives you a brief explanation of what it does. The problem we found is that those explanations themselves can be very mystifying. If I hover over a button, then the tooltip tells me you need to care about your liege and your rulers and vassals. If I'm a really new player, I don't know what those are to begin with either. So we've added a feature for tooltips inside of tooltips, so you can move your mouse into the tooltip you have open and then hover over certain key game concepts. That will open another tooltip and explain it. We have, of course, alerts. We've tried to focus them more in Crusader Kings III. They are not reminders of an ongoing status that you already know about. It is something like, you are not married, you should fix that. Click this button in the alert and it will take you to a screen where you can try and get a marriage. On the other hand, we have the Issues tab, which contains more of these current status pieces of information that aren't things you need to really worry about, but things you could look at if you want to. We also, inside the Issues tab, have suggestions. They are more targeted suggestions of things you could probably look at. You should build a building somewhere because you have a bunch of gold and you haven't built any recently. Those can be disabled in the settings screen, just so once you're more familiar with the game, you don't need to have them around. For less important pieces of information, we have two primary methods, the notifications and the toasts. Notifications are smaller pieces of info, such as how a council task is progressing. They're just ongoing pieces of information that appear, and after a set amount of time in game, they'll just minimize and close themselves. For the toast, those are more bombastic pieces of information, like you've gained a trait, or the outcome of an event that's had a dice roll of what would happen. Those things will pop up at the top of the screen, usually with a nice sound effect. You can also have them for less good things if you failed that seduction event and you've now looked like a fool in the court. We have added an in-game encyclopedia so that you can go through and see information in a more wiki fashion. It's generated in-game, so it's always up to date. It includes game concepts that you can then tooltip. It includes all the buildings you can look at, all the traits in the game. You can just search for the name. It has a search history, so you can go backwards and forwards, and you can just open it whenever in-game. It gives a good overview of information, whereas things like the fan wikis will still have their place to go more in-depth with strategies of how to play things and more in-depth explanations that you might want to spend more time reading. All of the things we've mentioned you can mod to your heart's content. Any new game concepts you add or any new traits you add will automatically be put in the encyclopedia. They'll automatically be hooked into the tooltips in tooltip system. You can script in your own notifications and alerts. All of that's done through the scripting system, so we expect modders to be able to both make a lot of cool stuff and then using the encyclopedia and the other notifications and info systems, be able to explain their systems as well.
With Magna, programmer, we have discussed governments in detail, your realm overview, and also raiding.
So in Crusader Kings III we have three playable governments, feudal, tribal and clan. The feudal government is focused mostly around contracts. You have a contractual obligation to your liege to provide levies and taxes. There are 3 levels of these obligations, which will give more levies and taxes, but will also make them a bit more upset. The clan government type is pretty similar to the ICTA government in CK2, and is focused more around dynastic relations rather than the contractual obligations that you see in feudal realms. Clan governments have an invasion casus belli, which they can use once per lifetime to invade an entire kingdom. This requires a very high level of fame, so you can't do this early on in your reign. The tribal government has their own holding type. These holdings provide significantly more levies than the feudal ones do, but provide less taxes. Tribal governments tend to be strapped for cash, but have enough troops to be a significant threat, especially early on. As the game goes on, they tend to become weaker and weaker compared to everyone else, as everyone else gets, better technology and so on. But they have a few methods to get out of being tribal by becoming either feudal or a clan. Since they're so focused on troops, they're also able to raid other realms. And to make this cheaper, they also have men-at-arms that are based on prestige rather than gold. Tribals have a subjugation casus belli that they can use once per lifetime. This will take the top tier title of that realm and then vassalize that person and all of their vassals. We have a realm overview that shows you the entire state of your realm. This will show you your vassals, your succession, and your own domain. We have a law system in Crusader Kings III, similar to how we had it in CK2. So the main law now is crown authority, and for tribals we have tribal authority instead. And this will unlock things like imprisonment for tribals because they don't start with it, revocation of titles and so on. And eventually you're also able to designate your heir and change your succession law. In Crusader Kings III we have a number of succession laws. For instance, we have partition, which is similar to gavelkind. We also have oldest child succession, we have youngest child succession, and we have seniority-based succession where the oldest living person in your house will inherit. We also have a number of elective variants, which vary based on title, and we have a bunch of culturally specific ones like the Norse. We've re-implemented raiding in Crusader Kings III. Now instead of doing a siege, you do a raid action. You're stuck while you're raiding so that it's easier if you're on the receiving end to actually deal with the raid. If you manage to beat a raid army, you take all of the gold they're carrying.
With Linnea, content designer at Paradox, we have had a chat about war declaration and also about managing your mercenaries.
So casus belli in the game we call them CBs, and they're basically like reasons to go to war. The different CBs in CK3 will have different declaration costs, and it can be everything from prestige to piety. But the most common one will still be claim CBs. If a CB is focused on prestige or piety, it's basically based on if it's someone of your own faith you're declaring the war against, or if it's someone of another faith. You can still declare a war if you don't have enough prestige or piety, but it will cost you more, like a level of devotion. Men-at-arms are basically your elite troops. The number of men-at-arms you can have is limited, but there will be multiple ways in the game where you can add slots. What you pay is an upkeep cost. When they are not raised, it will be fairly low, but when you raise them, you will have to pay quite a lot. There are a wide variety of different men-at-arms. The different types are, for example, what terrain they are good at in fighting and what other men-at-arms they're good at countering or weak against. There will be culturally specific men-at-arms, for example, huskarls and elephant warriors. We do have mercenaries in CK3 as well. If you have the gold to pay for them, they will add extra troops, they can affect what strategies you use, and sometimes they are the only way you can survive. You pay an upfront cost for your mercenaries, and this will be a 2-year contract, and you will get reminded when the contract is about to expire. The mercenaries that will be in the game will have both cultural and historical flavor. The coat of arms and the names will be generated depending on the culture. You will have 1, 2, 3 to choose from in each culture, and you can then make the choice based on how big they are, how much they cost, or what men-at-arms they have in their troops, so that you can tailor your armies based on what enemy you're facing.
With Alexander Altner, we talked about unhappy people, factions, rebellions, and civil wars.
We have 5 factions. We have the Independence faction that seeks to leave your realm. It's usually populated by people who are outside of your de jure area, or people that differ from you in culture and faith. You have the Liberty faction, which seeks more freedom for the vassals. And of course, the Claimant faction, which seeks to put someone else than you on your throne. The populist faction is very interesting. It takes the place of liberty revolts from CK2 and also involves characters in your realm. Say you have a lot of Norwegian Catholics in your empire. They might want to see a claimant to the Norwegian throne, and then the faction itself will be populated both by Norwegian Catholic vassals and Norwegian Catholic counties, which will reinforce the rebellion. Peasant rabble is the least threatening of all factions you can face. They will not destroy your realm or see land leave, but they will move around, lowering control, and the more they get to siege down your holdings, the larger the revolt itself will become, until eventually you're going to be overwhelmed by a horde of peasants and lose all control. When a faction is formed, they have a military value in how powerful they are compared to their liege. The more powerful they are, the more discontent they will become quicker. A weak faction will not be very discontent because they realize that if they rise up in revolt, they will be crushed. But a strong one, especially one that eclipses their liege, will rise in discontent quickly. So when a faction has reached maximum discontent, they will eventually send an ultimatum to their liege, stating what they want to see changed in the realm, be it lowered crown authority or independence. And then the liege can either comply, implementing a lesser version of what they would do if they were to lose the war, or they can go to war with a faction. If they lose, they will have to implement worse versions of whatever they demanded in the first place. Civil wars work differently from CK2. The realm is still intact, only you will see that parts of it has risen in revolt. So if you were to attack a realm that is in an ongoing civil war, you will still face the realm as a whole.
Naturally, our written dev diaries have much more information, so if you want to know more, click on the links below, and I will catch you next month.